It all ended with the smell of wet dog and disappointment. That's the scent of a corked wine. Specifically, a 1982 Chateau Margaux that sells for about $5,000 a bottle. Or, it would, if it weren't ruined. The wet, moldy cardboard aroma was faint, but to me, it was a klaxon horn of failure. I stood in the cathedral-like quiet of the dining room, the bottle in my hand, a pristine white napkin draped over my arm. Across the room, Alistair Finch, the man whose single paragraph could make or break a restaurant, was looking at his menu, oblivious. My boss, the celebrity chef Julian Croft, was not. He cornered me by the service station, his face a thundercloud of manufactured charm, collapsing into genuine rage. He kept his voice low, a venomous hiss that was more threatening than any shout. He smelled of truffle oil and ego. He said, "Just pour the wine, bottle girl." That was his name for me. On his TV show, where he'd recite my wine pairings verbatim as if they were divine inspiration, I was his secret weapon. In the restaurant, in the trenches, I was the bottle girl, a cute, dismissive title that put me in my place. I was the help. I looked at the bottle, then at him. My voice was even, betraying none of the tremor I felt in my hands. I said, "It's corked, chef. We can't serve this." His eyes, famous for their telegenic twinkle, went flat and hard. He said, "I didn't ask for your opinion. I said to pour the wine. Finch is expecting it. The investors are watching. Don't make a scene." I knew what this was about. This table wasn't just a critic. It was a performance for the money men who funded his expanding empire of frozen pastas and signature steak knives. Serving a flawed $5,000 bottle was an act of profound disrespect to the guest, to the wine, to the craft. But to Julian, the wine wasn't a living thing with a story to tell. It was a prop, a number on a ledger. Its only purpose was to impress, and he believed the label alone could do that job, regardless of the spoiled liquid inside. "I can't," I said. My professional ethics, the very core of what made me a master sommelier, wouldn't allow it. It was a line I would not cross. He looked at me as if I were a stain on his pristine chef's whites. He saw my refusal not as an act of integrity, but as an act of insubordination. He leaned in closer, his jaw tight. He said, "You are done. Get your things. Get out of my restaurant." It happened just like that. In the hushed elegance of a 3-Michelin-star dining room, with the clink of silver on porcelain as the soundtrack, my career was executed. There was no HR, no formal meeting, just a quiet, brutal dismissal. I felt the eyes of the other servers on me, the kitchen staff peering through the pass, a public shaming, disguised as a discreet word. I didn't break. I didn't cry. I simply gave a slight, formal nod. "As you wish, chef." I placed the tainted bottle of Margaux on the service station, removed my sommelier's pin, my taste fin from the chain around my neck, and placed it next to the bottle. A silent, symbolic surrender. Then I turned and walked toward the staff exit, my back straight, each step an exercise in controlled fury. The shock was a cold, heavy blanket, smothering everything else, but underneath it, a tiny hot ember of an idea was beginning to glow. What Julian didn't know, what he'd never bothered to know, was that the real power in this restaurant wasn't in his kitchen, it was in my cellar, and he had just given me the key. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know I'm not just speaking into the void here. If you've ever been underestimated, taken for granted, or had your work stolen by someone with a bigger title and a smaller conscience, let me know by liking this video. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The walk from the dining room to the cellar stairs felt like a mile. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded with each step down, replaced by the cool, damp silence of the earth. The cellar was my sanctuary, my library, my war room. The main section was a testament to Julian's extravagance. Walls of overpriced Bordeaux and flashy Napa cabs he bought for the name, not the quality. But tucked away, behind a heavy oak door at the far end, was a small, temperature-controlled room that was not on the restaurant's inventory. It was my private collection, my sanctum sanctorum. When I first took this job 5 years ago, I was a rising star. I had my credentials. I had the respect of my peers. But I needed a platform. Julian Croft's new restaurant, Aura, was that platform. He was already a household name, a charming television personality who made cooking look effortless and cool. I was brought in to build a world-class wine program from scratch. In the beginning, it was a partnership. I'd spend weeks sourcing a rare, esoteric vintage from a small grower in the Loire Valley, a wine that sang in perfect harmony with his new turbot dish. We'd taste it together, and he would nod, genuinely impressed. He'd say, "Stella, you're a genius." Then the first season of his show Croft's Table aired. I watched the episode on the turbot dish. He held up the very bottle I'd discovered, a 2012 Sancerre, from a producer so obscure you couldn't find him on Google. Julian looked into the camera with that sincere, practiced gaze and told a beautiful, fabricated story about how he had personally trekked through the French countryside and stumbled upon this hidden gem. He used my tasting notes, my words, my passion. He never mentioned my name. When I saw him the next day, he just clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Great press for the restaurant, eh?" That was the first crack in the foundation. I started to see the pattern. My work was his anecdote. My discoveries were his genius. In the kitchen, when the cameras were off, the charming collaborator vanished, replaced by a stressed, arrogant tyrant who saw his staff not as people, but as ingredients in his recipe for fame. That's when the bottle girl started. It was his little power play, a way to remind me, and everyone else, that no matter how much knowledge I had, I was just the girl who poured the bottles. My mentor, a formidable old sommelier named Antoine, had warned me. Antoine was a legend from the old school, a man who believed wine was a sacred trust. He'd retired to a small vineyard of his own, but he kept his ear to the ground. When I told him about the TV show, he just grunted. He said, "Fame is a solvent, Stella. It dissolves integrity first." He told me to protect myself. He said, "Men like Croft don't build legacies, they consume them. So you must build your own, quietly, in the shadows." That's when we devised the plan. It felt almost paranoid at the time, but Antoine insisted. He had his own lawyer draft a clause for my employment contract. It was a brilliant piece of legal artistry, disguised as a quirky perk for a high-level employee. It stipulated that I would be allocated a small, specific area of the cellar, identified by a surveyor's map attached as an addendum, for the storage of personal assets and oenological research materials. The restaurant would provide the climate control, but the contents and access to them were solely mine. Julian, eager to land a master sommelier for his new venture, barely glanced at it. His lawyer, more concerned with Julian's media rights, waved it through. It was just some weird request from the wine nerd. They signed it. It was notarized. It was ironclad. That little room became my lifeboat. I started my collection. It wasn't about hoarding expensive wine. It was about preserving stories, about building a liquid library of masterpieces. I used my own money, my connections from years of building trust with winemakers and collectors. I'd go to auctions, not as a representative of Aura, but as Stella Moreau, private collector. I'd buy a single bottle here, two there, wines Julian wouldn't understand or appreciate, wines with quiet, profound stories. I remembered the day I acquired the 1961 Latour à Pomerol. It wasn't at a flashy Christie's auction. It was from the cellar of a quiet widow in Belgium whose husband had been a diplomat. Antoine knew the family. He made the introduction. I spent an afternoon with her, not talking about price, but about her husband, about the dinners they'd hosted, about the memories sealed in that bottle. She sold it to me for a fraction of its market value, because she said, "You will not just drink it, you will understand it." Julian would have just seen the price tag. I saw a life. It was in that small, cold room, surrounded by these bottled memories, that the dam of my composure finally broke. I slid down the wall, my back against the cool, vibrating hum of the climate control unit, and I let the full weight of the humiliation crush me. 5 years of my life, 5 years of swallowing my pride, of smiling through the condescension, of watching my intellectual property be strip-mined for his celebrity. All for the prestige of a restaurant that had become a hollow brand, a beautiful stage for a mediocre play. The tears came, hot and silent. It wasn't just the firing, it was the waste. The slow, corrosive realization that my loyalty had been given to a man who valued it less than a corked bottle of wine. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, lost in the dark. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. I almost ignored it, but it buzzed again. I pulled it out. It was a text from Maria. Maria was my junior sommelier, a bright, fiercely passionate young woman I'd been training for the past year. She was sharp as a tack and had a palate that could detect a whisper of minerality from across a room. She saw everything. She saw the way Julian dismissed my ideas in meetings and then presented them as his own an hour later. She saw the grimace I hid when he called me bottle girl. Her loyalty was to me, not to the restaurant. The text was simple. It said, "Check your email. I forwarded you something from reservations." He doesn't see these unless they're flagged for him. My hands were shaking as I opened my email app. The subject line was, "Inquiry from Alistair Finch, Forbes cover story." My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. It was from Finch's senior editor. They were planning a major feature for their luxury issue. The proposed title was, "The Chef and His Cellar, Inside Julian Croft's Legendary Collection." The article was to be a fawning profile of Julian as a visionary, not just in the kitchen, but as a world-class wine connoisseur. They wanted to do a photo shoot, and then I saw it. The paragraph that changed everything. It read, "Alistair was particularly impressed during his last visit, and has requested that we feature 3 specific bottles he understands are the cornerstone of the collection. Please confirm you can have these available for photography. The 1990 Domaine de la Romanée Conti La Tâche, the 1961 Chateau Latour à Pomerol, and the 1978 Screaming Eagle prototype." I stopped breathing. A cold, electric shock jolted through me, chasing away the tears, the self-pity, the despair. It was replaced by a feeling so pure, so sharp, it was almost terrifying. It was the feeling of a chessboard, shrouded in fog for years, suddenly becoming crystal clear. The 1990 La Tâche, the 1961 Latour à Pomerol, the 1978 Screaming Eagle. He was asking for the Holy Trinity, the mythical, impossible-to-find legends of the wine world. Julian Croft did not own those wines. The restaurant did not own those wines. They weren't in the main cellar. They weren't in any inventory system. They were sitting on a custom-built rack less than 5 feet from where I was sitting. They belonged to me. The despair I'd felt just moments before now seemed like a foolish indulgence. The fog of emotion burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard lines of strategy. Julian hadn't just fired his sommelier. He had, in his arrogance, handed her the weapon, the motive, and the opportunity for a victory so complete, so poetic, it belonged in a Greek tragedy. This was no longer about a job, it was about a legacy. And Alistair Finch, the most powerful food critic on the planet, had just handed me an engraved invitation to claim my own. My breakdown was over, my resolve was forged. The bottle girl was about to take her bottles and go home. The plan bloomed in my mind, not as a scheme of revenge, but as a simple, logical sequence of events. A transfer of assets from an unworthy custodian to their rightful owner, and then to their rightful storyteller. It felt clean, it felt just. People often say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think it's a wine best served at the perfect temperature, with impeccable provenance, to an audience that can appreciate it. And I was about to stage the greatest tasting of my life. My first move was to erase my presence, not just my physical self, but my digital ghost. I went up to my tiny, windowless office. It was more of a closet, tucked away behind the coat check. I packed my personal books, my spare tastive, the photo of me and Antoine at his vineyard. Then I sat at my computer. I didn't delete files. That's for amateurs. That leaves a trail. Instead, I did what I had prepared for months ago. A contingency I hoped I'd never need. I initiated a secure wipe of my local user profile, a multi-pass process that would overwrite every byte of data with meaningless ones and zeros. My tasting notes, my supplier contacts, my private research, everything that lived on their server under my name would simply cease to exist. To any IT person, it would look like a corrupted profile, a common and annoying technical glitch. But the real data, the important stuff, wasn't on their server. It was on a small encrypted solid-state drive I kept in my bag. I'd been backing up my life's work every night for the past 2 years. Julian thought my value was in my ability to find and pour wine. He was a fool. My value was in my data. The network of relationships, the decades of accumulated knowledge. He had owned my labor, but he never owned the architecture of my mind. My second call was to Antoine. I told him everything. The corked Margot, the firing, the email from Finch. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard him let out a low, rumbling chuckle. He said, so the peacock has finally plucked his own feathers. Excellent. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy. He asked, what about the cameras in the cellar? A jolt of panic hit me. I'd forgotten. I texted Maria. Cellar cameras, your section, still active? Her reply came back in less than a minute. No, Julian had them disconnected on your side 6 months ago. The official reason was to save on the security subscription. The real reason is he wanted a blind spot to bring in his own special wine for his friends without it going into inventory. My blood ran cold. He had created the perfect crime scene for me out of his own petty corruption. He was so busy cheating the system on a small scale that he never imagined the system could be used against him on a grand one. Antoine had one more piece of advice. He said, do not simply take the wine, Stella. That is theft. Even if it is yours, you must create a paper trail of legitimate transfer. You are not a thief in the night. You are an executor of a contract. He was right. Emotion could make me sloppy. I needed to operate with the cold precision of a surgeon. So I didn't just grab the bottles and run. I went back to my locker, but first I stopped at my office printer. I printed a fresh copy of my employment contract, the one with the cellar clause. I also typed up a simple formal document. It was a notice of asset retrieval. It stated that pursuant to Section 4, Addendum B of my employment agreement, dated 5 years prior, I, Stella Moreau, was retrieving my personal assets from the designated storage area following the termination of my employment. I dated it and signed it. It was legally flimsy, perhaps, but it wasn't for a court of law. It was for the narrative. It was proof that I was acting openly, contractually. With the paperwork in hand, I walked down to the cellar for the last time. The air was still and cold. I walked past the racks of Julian's wine, a monument to expensive mediocrity. I unlocked the heavy oak door to my private room. The 3 bottles sat there like sleeping kings. The La Tâche, with its iconic, understated label, a wine of pure, ethereal grace. The La Tour à Pomerol, a dark, brooding powerhouse, a legend from a vintage that would never be repeated. And the Screaming Eagle prototype, a true unicorn. It wasn't even the famous Screaming Eagle that commands ludicrous prices today. It was from a barrel the winemaker had experimented with in 1978, long before the brand even existed. He made 24 bottles. Most were drunk or lost. I had found this one through a retired vineyard worker in Napa who had been given it as a gift 40 years ago. Its existence was a rumor. Its value was incalculable because it was, essentially, priceless. It was history. I carefully packed them into a specialized, foam-lined transport case. I took one last look around the small room that had been my secret garden. My Noah's Ark of wine. Then I placed the notice of asset retrieval on the empty shelf where the bottles had been, weighing it down with a cheap corkscrew I was leaving behind. I taped a copy of my contract to the inside of the door. I closed the door, locked it, and walked away. As I walked through the back corridor, past the clatter of the dish pit and the heat of the bakery, I saw Maria. She was organizing glasses, her back to me. She didn't turn around, but as I passed, she subtly slipped a small piece of paper into my hand. I didn't look at it until I was outside, in the cool night air of the alley. I unfolded it. It was a printout of the restaurant's security access logs for the service entrance. She had already deleted the record of my final exit. She had given me a 2-hour head start before I even officially became a ghost. This is a point many people might get stuck on. Why would Maria risk her job for me? It's a fair question. The simple answer is loyalty. But it's deeper than that. For a year, I had invested in her. I didn't just teach her about wine regions and grape varietals. I taught her how to stand up for herself in a male-dominated kitchen. I taught her that her palate was a gift, not an opinion. I gave her the respect Julian had never given me. In a toxic environment, true loyalty doesn't flow up to the name on the door. It flows sideways, to the people who fight alongside you in the trenches. She wasn't just helping me. She was investing in a future where people like her, and like me, would be the ones in charge. She was placing a bet on a different kind of leader. It wasn't about simple revenge. It was about building a better system, even if it meant dismantling the old one first. I stood in that grimy alley, the weight of the wine case in my hand, a dense, reassuring anchor. The city hummed around me. I was jobless. I had just walked away from one of the most prestigious positions in the culinary world. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt a profound, exhilarating calm. The fear was gone. The board was set. The pieces were in my hands, and I was about to make my first move. The next morning, I did nothing. I let the silence build. I knew Julian's rhythm. He'd come in around 10, basking in the afterglow of his decisive management of the insubordinate bottle girl. He'd probably feel a surge of power, of control. He wouldn't think about Alistair Finch's email. He delegated things like that to his PR team, his assistants, his general manager. He lived in a bubble of curated information, shielded from the messy details of his own business. I was counting on that bubble. Around noon, my phone lit up with the first text from Maria. He's here. He looks pleased with himself. An hour later, another text. PR just called the GM. They're confirming the photo shoot for Wednesday. They mentioned the 3 specific bottles. GM is white as a sheet. He's heading to the cellar. I smiled. The first domino had tipped. The general manager, a perpetually nervous man named Robert, was a classic Julian Croft hire. Competent enough to run the machine, but too timid to ever question the machinist. I could picture him now, scurrying down to the cellar with the restaurant's inventory list on a tablet. He would search the main cellar first, a growing sense of dread creeping into his heart. He'd check the computer system, cross-referencing bin numbers. Nothing. The wines didn't exist. Maria's texts became a running commentary of the unfolding chaos. Robert is back upstairs. He's trying to talk to Julian, who is busy tasting a new sauce and waving him off. Robert is now frantically calling our wine distributors. They're telling him those bottles are auction only, essentially unobtainable. Okay, now it's getting loud. Robert finally cornered Julian. I can hear him from the host stand. Julian is yelling, "What do you mean we don't have them? Finch asked for them." The beautiful, elegant machine of the restaurant was starting to sputter. The panic was a slow-burning fire, and Maria was my spy, watching it spread from a safe distance. The ultimate irony was that Julian's rage wasn't directed at the fact that he didn't own these priceless artifacts. It was directed at the fact that his subordinate had failed to magically produce them for him. In his mind, His desire should have been enough to bring them into existence. Now, it was time for my move. It had to be precise, professional, and devastating. I sat at my laptop in the quiet of my apartment. I opened my email and began to compose a message. It was not addressed to Julian. He was no longer relevant. It was addressed directly to Alistair Finch. I'd met him a half-dozen times at various events. We had a professional, if distant, acquaintance. I was betting that his respect for craft was greater than his loyalty to celebrity. The subject line was simple. Regarding your inquiry for the Forbes story, I wrote, Dear Alistair, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Stella Moreau. We've met on a few occasions, most recently at Aura. I was the head sommelier there until yesterday. I understand you are planning a cover story featuring a few specific, very rare vintages. I'm writing to you because it seems there may have been a miscommunication. The bottles you requested, the 1990 La Tâche, the 1961 Latour à Pomerol, and the 1978 Screaming Eagle prototype, are not, and have never been, part of the restaurant's collection. They are, in fact, the cornerstone of my own private collection, which I curated and stored at the location. I have recently resigned from my position to launch my own wine consultancy and have, of course, taken my personal assets with me. If your story is truly about the wines themselves, their history, their provenance, and their unique character, I would be honored to make them available to you and to share their stories. If, however, the story is contingent on their association with my former employer, I understand completely. For clarity, I have attached a copy of the legal agreement stipulating my ownership and private storage rights. I wish you the best with the feature. Sincerely, Stella Moreau. I attached the scanned PDF of the contract, the one with the surveyor's map, and the notarized signatures. I read the email over 3 times. It was perfect. It was polite, professional, and utterly damning. It didn't accuse Julian of anything. It simply stated facts. It drew a clean line in the sand. It gave Finch a choice. Are you writing a story about a celebrity, or are you writing a story about wine? I took a deep breath and clicked send. The silent takeover was now in motion. The response came faster than I could have ever imagined. It was less than 30 minutes later. My inbox pinged with a new message. The sender was Alistair Finch. My heart was a trip hammer. For a moment, I was too afraid to open it. This was the moment my entire strategy hinged on. If he sided with Julian, I was just a disgruntled ex-employee with 3 very expensive, very unsellable bottles of wine. But if he sided with the truth, I clicked it open. The email was brief, almost curt, but every word was a victory. Ms. Moreau, it began. Thank you for the clarification. This is, indeed, a welcome development. My interest is and has always been in the provenance of great things, not in the celebrity of their temporary custodians. A story about a true, hidden collection, curated by a passionate expert, is infinitely more compelling. My team will be in touch shortly to arrange a meeting at a time and place of your convenience. I look forward to it. Regards, Alistair Finch. I read it once, then twice. A slow smile spread across my face. Temporary custodian. The phrase was a stiletto, slipped cleanly between the ribs of Julian's ego. Finch got it. He didn't just understand the situation, he relished it. The narrative had been flipped. The cover story wasn't dead. It had just been reborn, stronger and more interesting than before. And I was now at its center. 5 minutes later, an email from his editor arrived, formally canceling the photo shoot at Aura due to a change in editorial direction and asking for my availability. The exodus had begun. It wasn't a flood of clients. Not yet. It was something far more powerful. It was the defection of the single most important validator in our world. The call from Julian came 2 hours later. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was a masterclass in panicked narcissism. It started with bluster. Stella, Julian, call me back immediately. There's been a huge misunderstanding. Robert is telling me some crazy story. Then it shifted to feigned concern. I hope you're okay. It was a stressful night. I was out of line. Then, the plea. Listen, Alistair Finch's people called. They've cancelled the shoot. We need to fix this. Whatever you want. A raise? The wine director title you wanted? It's yours. Just call me. We need to present a united front. A united front. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a co-conspirator in his lie. I saved the voicemail. It was a beautiful recording of a man realizing his own power was an illusion. He called again and again. I didn't answer. I let him stew in the silence. The power shift was not just about me gaining control. It was about him losing it. His panic was the sound of his hollow empire beginning to crumble. He had built his brand on an image of effortless perfection, of being the man who had everything, knew everything. The idea that his bottle girl could hold the key to something he desperately needed but could not have was a scenario his ego was simply not equipped to handle. He finally sent a text. I know you have the bottles. This is theft. My lawyers will be in touch. This was the move I was waiting for. The threat. It was the last resort of a bully who has lost the argument. I waited a full hour. Then I replied with a single attachment. The same PDF of the notarized contract I had sent to Alistair Finch. I added no text, no commentary, just the cold, hard proof of his mistake. His response was immediate. Meet me. Name the time and place. The threats were gone. The bluster had evaporated. All that was left was desperation. I had him. The power had shifted so completely, it was almost dizzying. Just 24 hours earlier, I was a disposable employee. Now, I was the one holding all the cards. I agreed to meet him. It was time for the final, quiet confrontation. It wasn't about gloating. It was about closing the ledger. I chose the location carefully. Not my apartment. That was my sanctuary. Not his restaurant. That was his stage. I chose the lobby bar of the Four Seasons Hotel. It was neutral ground, elegant, quiet, and ruthlessly impersonal. It was a place for transactions, not emotions. I got there 10 minutes early and chose a small table in a corner, ordering a glass of still water with lemon. I felt a strange, detached calm, the way you feel after a storm has passed, and the air is clean and sharp. Julian arrived exactly on time, a first for him. He was usually performatively late. He had traded his chef's whites for an expensive but ill-fitting suit, a costume of corporate power he looked deeply uncomfortable in. His face was pale, his telegenic charm completely gone, replaced by a raw, undisguised anxiety. He sat down without a word, his hands fidgeting on the table. He started talking before the waiter could even approach. It was a rambling, disjointed monologue of excuses, justifications, and promises. He said the bottle girl comment was just a stupid kitchen joke. He said the stress of the business was getting to him. He said he'd always valued me, that I was the best he'd ever worked with. It was all noise, the frantic, desperate sound of a man trying to rebuild a demolished house with rhetoric. Then came the offer. He would triple my salary. He would give me the title of executive wine director for his entire restaurant group. He would give me a budget, autonomy, anything I wanted. And then the line that revealed everything. He said, "We can be partners. We can build this brand together." I let him finish. I let the silence hang in the air for a full, uncomfortable 10 seconds. I took a slow sip of my water. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. I said, "You had a partner, Julian. You just called her the bottle girl." His face crumpled. That one sentence, his own stupid, condescending nickname, landed with the force of a physical blow. It was the truth, distilled and served neat. It invalidated every promise he had just made. The Forbes story is happening, I continued, my voice level and calm. But it's not about you anymore. It's about the wine. It's about the collection. It's about the curator. Alistair Finch is interested in a story about authenticity, and that's a story you can no longer be a part of." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He was finally processing the totality of his loss. It wasn't just about the magazine cover. It was about his narrative. I had taken control of his story. "It wasn't about revenge, Julian," I said, leaning in slightly. And this was the absolute truth. It was about a corked bottle of Margot. You were willing to commit an act of fraud, to sacrifice the integrity of the craft for optics. You asked me to be complicit in that lie. That's when it ended. Not when you fired me, but when you asked me to stop being who I am. I stood up. I placed a $20 bill on the table for my water. "I have a meeting to prepare for," I said, "with Alistair." I turned and walked away without looking back. There was nothing more to say. The vindication wasn't in his defeat. It was in my own quiet, unshakable sense of self. I had refused to pour the broken wine. I had chosen integrity over a paycheck. And now, the world was rewarding me for it. A month later, the magazine hit the newsstands. The cover was a work of art. A moody, beautifully lit photograph of the 3 bottles, their labels glowing. In the background, slightly out of focus but undeniably present, was me, swirling a glass of wine, a look of quiet concentration on my face. The headline was stark and brilliant: "The Curator's Cellar, Inside the Secret Collection of Stella Moreau." The article itself was a love letter to the craft. Alistair Finch wrote about the soul of wine, about the collectors who are more like librarians, preserving history and stories in glass. He described my journey, my passion, my philosophy. He told the story of the Belgian widow and the 1961 Latour à Pomerol. He described me as a quiet force in a world of loud personalities. He never mentioned Julian or Ara by name. He only referred to my former workplace as a high-profile but soulless celebrity establishment, where true talent was a resource to be mined, not nurtured. The erasure was devastatingly complete. He had been rendered a footnote in my story. The fallout was swift. Maria kept me updated. The restaurant's reviews, already slipping due to Julian's inattention, plummeted. Without a strong wine program to mask the kitchen's failings, the emperor was revealed to have no clothes. The investors, the same ones Julian had been performing for on that fateful night, read the Forbes article. They weren't angry about the wine. They were angry about the lie and the public embarrassment. 2 weeks after the magazine came out, Julian Croft was fired by his own ownership group. His brand, built on a foundation of stolen credit and charisma, had collapsed in on itself. My own world, in contrast, was just beginning to bloom. The article was a global advertisement for my skills and my integrity. The day it was published, my phone and email exploded. Collectors, hoteliers, winemakers, everyone wanted to work with the curator. My little consultancy, which I had imagined would be a small, one-woman operation, suddenly had a waiting list. My first hire, of course, was Maria. She gave her notice at Aura the day Julian was fired, walking out with a smile on her face. The moral of the story isn't that I won, it's that I refused to lose in a way that mattered. For years, I thought success meant climbing the ladder in someone else's house. I put up with the disrespect, with the intellectual theft, because I thought the Michelin stars and the famous name were the prize. But the real prize was never the job. It was the work itself. It was the knowledge I had built, the relationships I had nurtured, the collection I had quietly assembled. My final victory wasn't seeing Julian fall. It was the moment I stood in my own new space, a small, elegant tasting room I was building with the profits from my first few consulting gigs. Antoine was there, as was Maria. We had just landed our first major client, a luxury hotel group that had pulled its business from Julian's crumbling empire. We were celebrating, not with champagne, but with a beautiful, humble bottle of Sancerre, from the very same producer Julian had stolen from me all those years ago. It tasted like freedom. And as I raised my glass, I realized it was never about the revenge. It was about ownership. Owning your work, owning your worth, owning your name. He called me the bottle girl. And in the end, he was right. I was the girl with the bottles, the ones that mattered, and they belonged to me. So here's my question to you. What is the thing that you own? What is the skill, the knowledge, the integrity that no one can take from you, no matter what title they hold or what name is on the building? Think about that. Because your real power isn't in the job they give you, it's in the value you create. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to own your own narrative, then do me a favor, like this video so it can find other people who need to hear it. Leave a comment and share your own story of being underestimated. And please subscribe to the channel, because the world is full of bottle girls and boys who are one decision away from owning the whole cellar. And those are the stories I want to tell.